Welcome on in everyone and welcome to the Cup of Tea channel. So I've done a video covering the campfire chat, but we now have the official patch notes live today. So they are going to be going through the main changes with sorcerers and barbarians. They said those were going to be the main focuses of the classes. Other classes did receive some buffs here and there, not just to their skills, abilities, paragon boards, but also to the legendaries where we will explain later on. So starting off, they have said the sorcerer improved the late game survivability, mostly through the paragon board improvements, adjust some of the class mechanics to move away from the kiss curse effect. So that's basically they will give you a buff, but in return they'll take something away instead. They wanted to take a step back from that. We then had the barbarian speed the flow of combat in early game, so that's going to be to do with your basic skill fury resource generation, but they have done that with the druid as well. We then have added the late game excitement by increasing the power of the unique items. So what that is, they're going to be making some stat changes as well as some percentage buffs as well. So we're going to move on to the barbarian first. So first of all, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the fury resource generation, that will make a large improvement as the leveling progresses. We then have some passives. Like I said, if you want to have a bit more detail of what we went through, we have the campfire breakdown chat I'll put it in the description below, so be sure to click on that. But the aggressive resistance, damage reduction 3 to 4%, but they also made some adjustments to the bleed damage when overpowering. It will increase from 11% up to 70% with the gushing wounds effect. We then have the walking arsenal. They increased it from 6 seconds to up to 8 seconds, so it allows players to get that free stack damage bonus with the walking arsenal. We then have the legendaries. So moving on, we then have the aspect of Ancestral Force, damage increase from 32 to 50%, up to 40 to 58%. But if we scroll all the way down, they wanted to help buff up certain build classes in that. One being for the Barbarian, the Earthquake build. So aspect of Bold Kathos, you have the damage reduction while in Earthquakes increase from 5 to 15, up to 15 to 25%, as well as the Earthquake aspect, which is damage bonus in Earthquakes increased by 5 to 15, up to 15 to 25. And mentioned earlier with the Uber Uniques, they wanted to buff up some of the stats, but they also have changed out some of the stats as well. So with the Fields of Crimson, Rupture cooldown reduction affix replaced with bonus critical strike damage, critical strike, as well as the vulnerability damage. Those are the stats that Barbarians are mainly looking out for. So Ramaladi's Magnum Opus, physical damage affix replaced with the vulnerability damage. And then we have 100,000 steps Uber Unique, which is the damage against stunned affix has been replaced with the bonus movement speed. We're then going to be moving on to Rogue. So as mentioned from earlier, they have made some changes in that with the skills and abilities. No major buffs in that, but some quality of life improvements. So fundamental invigorating strike, energy threshold increased from 50 to 75%. But we also have our primary forceful arrow. So every third cast pierces the enemies rather than through vulnerable enemies. We then have passive changes. So for example, the siphoning strikes, lucky hit chance increased from 75 up to 85%, as well as victimize, lucky hit chance increased from 35 to 45%. So lucky hit chance getting some love there for the rogue. We then have our legendary, so aspect of quickening fog, you automatically drop a smoke grenade at the end of a dash. Smoke grenades reduce the dash's cooldown from 0.4 to 0.6 seconds per target hit, up to 2 to 3 seconds. And then some adjustments or stat changes to the Uber Uniques for the rogue. So Wind Force, all stats affix has been replaced with vulnerable damage, as well as Word of Hakan or Hakan. Ultimate damage affix has been replaced with cooldown reduction. Druids, like I mentioned earlier with the Barbarian, they made some adjustments or buffs to the basic skills resource generation. So Earth Spike, Claw, Storm Strike, Wind Shear, Maul have been buffed, but they also wanted to make some buffs to the passive effects as well as the main damage for pet builds. So Wolves, Enhanced Wolf Pack, Brutal Wolf Pack, Ferocious Wolf Pack, and Ravens have all received some buffs there. The Rabies ability, the damage over time, it has been increased from 76% all the way up to 110%, so a big buff there. And then they have made a Paragon adjustment to the Lightning Resilience rare node. Maximum life bonus increased from 4% up to 6%, as well as some legendary adjustments. Spirit cost reduction from the Metamorphic Stone from 60 down to 50. Damage dealt increased from 80 to 100 up to 100 to 120. And obviously the Mangled Aspect resource gain 1 has been bumped up to 3, so another resource generation right there. And then lastly, the class mechanic with the Overload, lucky hit chance. Once again, that stat has been improved from a 20% increase up to 40%. Now we're going to move on to Sorcerer. So they have made some adjustments to the fire and lightning builds, buffing certain damages and also proccing off bosses. So it's not just mobs. We then have the passives such as the Veer's Mastery, damage bonus increased from 10% to 15. Esu's Ferocity, which is additional functionality. Both bonuses also grant for 3 seconds when hitting a boss with a critical strike. We then move on to the Sorcerer's Paragon board. So they've mainly focused upon the damage reduction in general, but also when enemies are vulnerable, as well as the Lightning Resilience rare node. Maximum life bonus increased from 4% up to 6%. We then have the Sorcerer's Legendary. So we've had quite a few adjustments and changes, such as the Serpentine aspect. You may have 1 additional Hydra active, and the Hydra's duration is increased from 14 to 24%. This now affects the Hydra's enchantment effect. We then have some aspects from the legendaries which affect burning enemies, increasing the critical strike from Meteor and Fireball from the 3 curses. Then we scroll down a little bit more, and then we have our aspect of concentration, mana regeneration, so improvements on getting your mana back or generating. That has been improved on in general skills as well as the affixes. And then we move on to our uber unique here, Gloves of the Illuminator. So damage penalty reduced from 65%, 55 to 45 to 35. Damage stunned affix have been replaced with Lucky Hit, once again improving the Lucky Hit stance, as well as the overpower stats for certain classes, but this will now restore your resource, so a bit more mana regeneration, so you're able to pump out a bit more damage with your core abilities. And the Illuminator's first bounce occurs much closer to the player. We then have our Necromancer. So again, some slight buff changes and adjustments right here. So we have our Enhanced Bone Spirit. Cooldown reduction increased from 6 to 7 seconds, as well as our Paragon Wither legendary board. Willpower requirement for bonuses reduced from 50 to 40. Bonus power per 40 willpower has been increased from 2.5 up to 4%. And then moving on to our legendaries, aspect of the Empowering Reaper. So damaging enemies with Sever has a 10 to 20% chance to spawn a pool of blight under the target, deals 26% bonus damage. This effect can only happen once every 3 seconds. So I believe it's now just a general when it hits an enemy, and it's not based on critical hits instead. So again, you don't have to worry about those procs. We then have our aspect of Exposed Flesh. Lucky Hit, up to 10% chance to generate 30 to 50 essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy. Aspect of Decay, damage increased from 20 to 40%, so some damage increase percentages as well from the aspects. We then move on to our uniques. So again, as I joked around with the campfire chat, you've had your Intelligence aspects replaced with the bonus movement speed, because I know a lot of you necromancers don't like running too much, so now you have a bit more speed to your build there. And then obviously some buffs to the druid and necromancer minions. So the following affects from the dungeons: the Fire Enchanted, Electrified Obelisk, and Shock Lancers will deal a lot less damage, as well as the Balrog boss Fire Breath. We then move on to our gameplay updates, so this is focusing around the Hell Ties and dungeons in Diablo. So the bosses above level 60 will have more health, and for example, from bosses level 80 will have a 50% health increase, 100 will have 100%, 120, 120, and bosses level 150 will have 150% increase. Bosses and events. So level 35 and higher bosses will now have a 100% chance to drop a legendary item. So this will be really good when you hit that sort of level threshold to start farming these items. An improvement to treasure goblins as well. So a chance from level 6 to 14 and a guaranteed legendary item drop when you start level 15. Legion events will now have a reward of guaranteeing a legendary drop at level 35 as well. So when it comes to farming those legendary affixes from certain items or just getting decent loot, it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience, which will then overall improve your leveling experience as well. They've made some general changes, such as improvements to damage and how it interacts with barriers. So this is actually an interesting one I read earlier. So enemies such as skeletons with the shields or butcher, when they generate that temporary barrier, so the bonus damages effects such as vulnerability and that will now apply even through the barrier. It's not you have to deplete the barrier and then the effect lands on it. You can get that bonus as that barrier is on them. So also we have the Vishan can now break through bone wall segments as he dashes through it, as obviously it'd be kind of a bit weird. This big boss gets stuck inside a little bone cage. Doesn't make much sense. So they've made adjustments to that one. And then the cost for refunding skills and paragon points. So as you level and progress up, you'll get a much more larger percentage off on the cost than that, but it does work out to be balanced out a lot more. So when you are at level 100, it's going to cost 40% less overall for you to get your refund. So it's going to offer you a lot more opportunities to then change builds out if you want to. You're not going to be suffering like a 20 mil, a 40 mil refund and have to farm through all the way through that, and that is not going to be as a nightmare. So we've also increased the stack limit for elixirs from 20 up to 99, just a nice quality of life change. And then additional stash tab, which can be purchased with gold, pretty much standard. We then have the leave dungeon cast time. It was 3 seconds. For some reason, they buffed it to 5 seconds. I say buff. They made us take 5 seconds to get out of dungeons, and they've reverted that back now to 3 seconds. Yes. And then we're going to be moving on to the Nightmare Dungeon affixes. They have removed resource burn, backstabbers, and empowered elites cold enchanted. There was something I'm going to go through a little bit down the line, and that they have done some bug fixes. We won't go into it too much, but there is something quite interesting that I did find out from this. But moving on, we have the Malignant Hearts Cage Heart spell breaking. This was then changed. When you got hit by an element, you would gain a 10 to 20% damage reduction to that element. It's no longer the case. It is now just a general. You will get a 10 to 20% damage reduction overall. Generic unique items temerity was replaced with the affix of all stats, is now replaced with max life. The barrier is now based upon your maximum life, and now properly accounted the conditions of checking the player having a barrier. Moving on to bug fixes. So this is something that I found quite interesting as I went down. So they fixed an issue where the determination malignant power wouldn't function against the resource burn affix in Nightmare Dungeons. So with the patch, they're fixing resource burn, but they've removed it. So I'm just like, what are you doing there? What's happening here? Is it going or is it not? So I believe they are just removing it. I don't know why they've replaced the bug issue, and that maybe that's something we'll find out later on. They have made some improvements on the horse mount as well. They put out a tweet saying you'll be able to use your charge to break through barriers in the open world, and that, so transversing through Sanctuary is going to be a lot more smoother. And then additionally, I'm looking forward to the overall changes that are going to be implemented on the 8th of August, especially for the Barbarian. I'm really hoping that either the charge build or the Earthquake build does perform just as well as Hota, Whirlwind Barbarian, and that, because I want to try these different build changes and that, and thank goodness for the refunds as well, the percentage reduction, so we can actually try these builds out and not be too harshly punished on that. But I hope to see you in the Diablo world, and I hope this information is super useful. I will put a link of the patch notes in the video as well, so you can find that there, as well as my campfire chat breakdown video for a bit more detailed information as well. But I hope you found this video super useful, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Diablo content, and I'll see you in the next one.